Under the gray dawn of March 4th, 1941, the North Sea churned with freezing spray and salt. A flotilla of small, black-painted craft crept through the mist, their engines throttled low, muffled beneath canvas and prayer. Inside, 56 men of British Combined Operations crouched in silence, gripping Sten guns and Fairburn Sykes daggers. Their faces were smeared with soot, their breath shallow. Their orders simple but impossible: land on the Norwegian coast, destroy a vital fish oil plant feeding Germany's explosives industry, and vanish before the sun revealed their sin. The operation was called Claymore. The time, 4:30 a.m. The first of the great British commando raids was about to be born. From the cliffs of the Lofoten Islands, German sentries saw nothing. The sea seemed empty. Yet, behind the horizon, Royal Navy destroyers HMS Somali, HMS Bedouin, and HMS Tartar loomed like shadows of vengeance. At 5:15 a.m., as faint pink light seeped across the Arctic sky, the first landing craft hissed toward shore. The commandos hit the beaches in silence, boots crunching over frost-hardened sand. Their target, storage tanks filled with glycerin oil, a lifeline for German munitions. Within minutes, charges were planted. When they detonated, the explosions lit the dawn like a second sunrise. The raid was over in 2 hours. By 7 a.m., the British had destroyed 11 factories, sunk multiple German vessels, and taken over 200 prisoners. As they retreated, the thunder of explosions echoed off the fjords. The men aboard the destroyers looked back and saw smoke pillars twisting into the pale Norwegian morning. For the first time since Dunkirk, Britain had struck back, not with divisions or fleets, but with small, surgical teams that attacked where the enemy least expected. The world took notice. Hitler did too. Months earlier, in 1940, Britain's situation had seemed hopeless. France had fallen. The Luftwaffe had pounded London for months. The British Army was battered, reeling from retreat. But amid that despair, one man, Winston Churchill, saw a new kind of warfare. He demanded a specially trained force of hunters that could butcher and bolt. These were to be Britain's commandos, volunteers trained for raids, sabotage, and psychological shock. They would strike from the sea like ghosts, using speed and audacity as their weapons. The idea wasn't entirely new. During the First World War, British naval brigades had staged limited raids on the Belgian coast. But now, in the Second, Churchill wanted something far more aggressive, a force that would keep Germany's occupied coasts in a state of constant fear. The name itself, Commando, came from the Boer fighters who had tormented British troops in South Africa decades earlier. It meant mobility, cunning, and unorthodox skill. For Churchill, it meant revenge to AT training camps in the Scottish Highlands. These new soldiers were forged in secrecy. In Achnacarry, Arisaig, and Inverary, men learned to climb cliffs in the dark, wade through icy rivers, and fight with knife, pistol, and silence. Every dawn began with gunfire, and every night ended with exhaustion. Their motto, "United we conquer," wasn't a slogan. It was a survival rule. Recruits trained with live ammunition. Mistakes meant blood. Their instructors were veterans of the Shanghai Municipal Police, tough men like William E. Fairbairn and Eric A. Sykes, who taught the art of silent killing and close-quarters battle. The dagger they designed together, double-edged, precise, lethal, became the Commando's signature weapon. By late 1940, Combined Operations Headquarters had taken shape under Admiral Sir Roger Keyes, later replaced by Lord Louis Mountbatten. Their mission: to plan and coordinate amphibious strikes against Nazi-controlled Europe. The first attempts were chaotic. Operation Collar, in June 1940, barely made landfall. Operation Ambassador, in July, ended in confusion and failure. But each lesson was brutal and valuable. Radios jammed. Boats drifted off course. Tides betrayed timing. Still, they persisted. Because Britain needed victories, even small ones, to prove it wasn't defeated. The idea of raiding at dawn was no accident. Darkness offered concealment, but the first light of morning brought just enough visibility for coordination. It was a razor's edge between stealth and chaos. Commanders realized that when the enemy's night watch was exhausted and daylight barely returned, their defenses were weakest. The moment of transition, from dark to light, became the commandos' favorite hour. It was when their courage and the enemy's fatigue met head-on. After Operation Claymore, the effect was immediate. German garrisons along the Atlantic Wall began doubling sentries. Alarm systems were installed in fishing villages. Thousands of troops were tied down guarding lonely beaches from Scotland to Bordeaux. Hitler called the raiders terror troops and issued orders for captured commandos to be executed on sight. Yet every attempt to stop them only deepened their legend. WWII 1942, the raids had evolved into precision operations. Commandos learned to synchronize naval bombardments, demolition teams, and intelligence units. They began using small craft like the Fairmile motor launches and folding kayaks for infiltration. Their raids struck radar stations, coastal guns, and U-boat pens, often with devastating accuracy. The Germans, obsessed with conventional battle lines, struggled to understand an enemy who appeared from nowhere, fought for hours, and vanished into the sea. Each raid served a deeper strategic purpose. They forced the Wehrmacht to defend thousands of miles of coastline. They gathered intelligence on radar, weather stations, and supply movements. They tested amphibious tactics that would later be vital for D-Day. And, above all, they restored a sense of offensive spirit to a battered nation. Point 1. Report from the period described the commandos as young men who smiled in the face of the impossible. They were not just soldiers, they were symbols. Britain broadcast news of their exploits across occupied Europe. To Norwegians, Frenchmen, and Poles under German rule, those smoky raids at dawn were proof that the Allies still fought, still struck, still believed. But beneath the glory lay exhaustion and loss. Many raids went wrong. At WWII in December 1941, a brutal firefight cost dozens of British lives, though the objectives were achieved. At St. Nazaire in March 1942, in the famous Operation Chariot, hundreds of men stormed the docks to destroy the Normandy dry dock. Only a fraction returned. Still, their courage electrified Britain. Newspapers called them the tip of Churchill's sword. By the middle of 1942, the commandos had become a doctrine, a new military science born from desperation. Their raids were carefully timed with the rhythm of the sea and sky. The reason was always the same. At dawn, the world is half asleep, the shadows long, the wind cold, and fear most paralyzing. The moment when the first light hits the horizon is the moment of decision. Too late for retreat, too early for alarm. It was there, in that fragile window, that Britain found its revenge. And yet, as the raids grew bolder, questions began to emerge in the War Office. Were these missions worth the risk? Could small teams truly alter the course of a vast industrial war? The answers would come soon, in the smoke and blood of a raid unlike any before, where dawn would not just be an hour, but a battlefield itself. To in the pre-dawn blackness of August 19, 1942, the sea outside Dieppe was calm, deceptively so. More than 6,000 Allied troops, mostly Canadians, waited aboard 250 landing craft as engines hummed in the dark. Above them, RAF bombers droned unseen in the clouds. The mission, codenamed Operation Jubilee, was to seize and hold the port for a few hours, destroy coastal defenses, gather intelligence, and test the feasibility of a future invasion of France. On paper, it seemed straightforward. In reality, it would become the bloodiest lesson in British commando history. The first landing struck at 4:50 a.m. The horizon was a charcoal smear, the beach shrouded in mist. As the craft neared shore, the Germans opened fire. Machine guns chattered from concrete bunkers, scything through men and metal. Mortars splashed into the surf. Landing ramps dropped, and soldiers charged straight into death. Within minutes, the operation unraveled. Tanks bogged down in shingle, radios failed, and smoke screens drifted away. The sunrise that was meant to illuminate victory revealed only carnage. But amid the chaos, the commandos did their work. Small teams, men from No. 3 and No. 4 Commando, along with Royal Marine units, landed on the flanks. Their objective, the coastal batteries at Varengeville and Berneville. At Varengeville, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater, No. 4 Commando moved swiftly through the mist, scaling cliffs, slitting sentry throats, and planting demolition charges with clinical precision. By 7 a.m., the guns were silenced. The unit exfiltrated with minimal losses, leaving behind a smoking ruin that had once commanded the channel. It was this contrast, catastrophic failure at Dieppe's center and surgical success at its flanks, that proved the commando doctrine's worth. When speed, stealth, and coordination worked, even fortified German defenses could fall before breakfast. When surprise was lost, disaster followed. The lesson was clear. Timing ruled all. British planners went back to their drawing boards. Combined operations analyzed the raid minute by minute, frame by frame, from reconnaissance photos and debriefs. They discovered that their dawn window was more than poetic, it was mathematical. The best light for coastal assault lasted just 37 minutes on average, enough visibility for navigation, but too little for German gunners to adjust their sights. Too early, and darkness swallowed direction. Too late, and the defenders awoke. The next generation of raids would exploit this narrow sliver of time with machine-like precision. In 1943, those lessons took shape in operations that defined the art of raiding. On the night of June 22nd, Operation Forfar, a small commando team, infiltrated the coast of Norway again, striking a German radar installation. They used new technology, miniaturized demolition timers, and waterproof compasses, innovations crafted in British labs under engineers like Dr. Millis Jeffress at MD1, nicknamed Churchill's Toyshop. His inventions, from magnetic limpet mines to time pencils, made destruction portable and personal. Each device was tested relentlessly, often by the men who would later use them. The success of these technical breakthroughs relied on precision manufacturing. The Royal Ordnance Factories in Enfield and Woolwich worked alongside civilian firms like Vickers Armstrong and ICI, producing silent pistols, folding submachine guns, and waterproof explosives. Engineers adapted naval depth charges into compact satchels for commando use. Even the humble rubber dinghy underwent innovation, double-chambered for redundancy, blackened for night operations, and fitted with detachable outboards for quick retreat. Every gram mattered. Every second counted. And then came the Mediterranean. Under the blistering sun of 1943, British commandos joined new allies, the U.S. Rangers and Free French units, striking along the coasts of Sicily and Italy. The pattern repeated: land in darkness, attack at dawn, disappear by noon. Their raids crippled communications centers, rail lines, and fuel depots. One unit, Number 10 Inter-Allied Commando, included Norwegians, Belgians, Poles, and Frenchmen, a coalition of Europe's exiles, united by vengeance. Their actions stretched from the Greek islands to the Adriatic, each one a spark that kept the Axis awake at night. For the Germans, these attacks were infuriating. Field reports described phantom units appearing where no divisions existed. A captured German major wrote, dramatized composite, "They strike when the sea is black, when the horizon bleeds light. We man our guns all night now. We fear the morning more than the dark." This constant fear was not accidental. It was the psychological weapon Churchill had envisioned. Every raid forced the enemy to guard everywhere. All the time, by late 1943, commando operations had become laboratories of warfare. They pioneered innovations that would define the Normandy invasion: beach reconnaissance, demolitions, communication protocols, and naval gunfire coordination. Their methods blended science and audacity. Portable radio sets, developed by Pi Ltd and Marconi engineers, allowed real-time communication between beach and ship, a first in amphibious warfare. Light signaling lamps replaced noisy wireless chatter. Each detail, from tide calculations to explosive yields, was recorded, tested, and refined. Their physical endurance bordered on mythic. A typical operation meant rowing for hours through freezing surf, hauling gear over cliffs, then fighting in silence until extraction. Many missions required them to swim back to waiting submarines or motor launches, often pursued by enemy patrols. Survival depended not only on courage but also on engineering. Reliable detonators, self-heating rations, waterproof watches, and compasses built to resist magnetism. Every small piece of design kept men alive. Yet, the raids were not only about destruction. They were also about intelligence. Eyes in the dark, ears in occupied Europe. Commandos captured codebooks, weather data, and radar schematics that fed directly into Britain's wider war machine. One operation on the French coast recovered Enigma rotors from a German trawler. Another dismantled a radar antenna and carried it piece by piece to the beach. Engineers at TRE Malvern later studied its design, directly improving Allied radar countermeasures. Still, the Dawn raids came at a price. Each success demanded secrecy, and every failure demanded silence. Families never knew where their sons fought. Names of fallen commandos appeared only in terse announcements, missing on operations. Their deeds often remained classified for decades. In exchange for that anonymity came impact far beyond their numbers. They had forced Hitler to fortify the Atlantic Wall, diverting vast manpower and resources away from the Eastern Front. An invisible victory measured in cement and delayed at WWII 1944. The commando spirit had infected entire armies. The U.S. Rangers stormed cliffs at Point du Hoc. The British 1st Special Service Brigade landed on Sword Beach under Lord Lovat, pipes playing as bullets flew. The art of the Dawn raid had evolved into the architecture of D-Day itself. Every timetable built upon those early lessons of stealth and surprise. But before that grand invasion, one more chapter remained. The transformation of the commandos from raiders into the architects of full-scale liberation. What began as midnight strikes on lonely coasts was about to become something far larger, a blueprint for the Allied assault on Fortress Europe. Dawn would no longer be just an hour of attack. It would become the hour of destiny. The morning of June 6, 1944, began like so many of their earlier missions: dark seas, whispered prayers, and the taste of salt on the air. But this time, the scale was unimaginable. As the horizon glowed faintly over the Norman coast, thousands of ships lay anchored offshore. Among them, the men of Britain's 1st Special Service Brigade waited in landing craft, their faces painted black, their hearts steady. The veterans among them, survivors of Dieppe, Viagso, and Lofoten, recognized the rhythm of the sea and the timing of light. It was the same pattern they had rehearsed for years: strike at dawn, move fast, hit hard, and never stop. The hour had come when every lesson carved in blood and surf would be tested. At precisely 7:25 a.m., Lord Lovat stepped on his Sword Beach, leading his commandos through the chaos with a white sweater beneath his battle gear and his personal piper. Bill Millen, playing Highland Laddie, through a storm of fire. Bullets tore into the sand. Mortars thumped. But the rhythm of the bagpipes, defiant, surreal, unbroken, carried across the beach. It wasn't madness. It was a message. The commandos had arrived, not as raiders now, but as vanguard, the tip of the spear for liberation. The doctrine of the Dawn assault, perfected in small raids, had become the choreography of the largest amphibious landing in history. Their objectives that day were exact: advance inland to connect with the 6th Airborne Division, secure bridges over the Orne River and Caen Canal, and prevent German armor from cutting off the beachhead. Moving with the precision of a knife through fog, the brigade cut through resistance, linking up with paratroopers by mid-morning. Every decision, timing, route, coordination, reflected years of refinement born from Norway, France, and the Mediterranean. Each man carried the ghost of earlier raids beside him, guiding his instincts through the smoke. Elsewhere along the coast, men who had once been commandos now commanded new units: Rangers, Marine Raiders, and SAS detachments, all inheriting the same philosophy: adaptability, audacity, and speed. What had begun as Churchill's desperate experiment in 1940 had reshaped Allied strategy by 1944. The principle of the Dawn raid, shock before daylight, became the spine of modern amphibious warfare for the Germans. The experience was disorienting. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had spent months reinforcing Normandy's defenses, convinced the Allies would land during daylight when naval support was strongest. Instead, they struck in that gray, transitional hour when confusion ruled. German coastal units were caught mid-routine, their officers roused from quarters, their guns searching for targets half seen through the fog. The old pattern repeated. When the enemy's mind hesitated, the British struck. But beyond the tactics and timing lay the psychological war, the unseen battlefield the commandos had mastered. Each raid before D-Day had built not only skill but also myth. The Germans had come to expect that at dawn, the sea itself might betray them. This lingering dread eroded confidence, fostered overreaction, and fractured discipline. Even before a bullet was fired in Normandy, the legend of the British Commandos had done its work, an invisible artillery barrage in the mind of the enemy. In the months that followed, as Allied armies pushed inland, commando units continued their unique role. They seized ports, cleared mines, hunted radar posts, and linked with partisans behind German lines. In the Adriatic, they assaulted islands under moonlight, cutting Axis escape routes. In Burma, Chindits adapted commando principles for jungle warfare, ambushing convoys at dawn with similar precision. Across continents, the same formula held true: darkness to confusion, dawn to strike, and retreat before full daylight. Technological evolution followed them. Portable radio transmitters became standard issue across Allied forces. They're designed descendants of the compact sets used in earlier raids. Engineers refined the Fairbairn-Sykes knife into newer combat models. Camouflage patterns, designed for coastal landings, inspired uniforms still used decades later. The synergy between soldier and engineer, between battlefield and workshop, endured. In factories across Britain, women and men continued the hidden labor of innovation, perfecting waterproof detonators, folding rifles, and inflatable boats, and compasses that functioned under any condition. Every new invention fed the doctrine of speed and surprise. The legacy of those engineers was more than metal. It was the architecture of morale. Knowing their tools worked flawlessly, commandos dared more. The raids had proven that ingenuity was as potent as firepower. That same spirit powered the logistics miracle of the Mulberry Harbors, the artificial ports that made the Normandy supply lines possible. Behind every landing craft that touched the French coast was the echo of small-scale raids. Experiments turned empire-saving strategies. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, many of the original commandos had been redeployed or absorbed into new units. Some returned home quietly. Others continued their craft in emerging special operations groups. Their contribution was vast yet understated. Historians would later call them the ancestors of modern special forces, the DNA of the SAS, SBS, and countless elite regiments worldwide. But for those who survived, their pride was simpler. They had proven that discipline, daring, and timing could make a small force strike like an army. In post-war Britain, their ethos lingered in training manuals and memories. New recruits at Sandhurst studied their raids as case studies in initiative and courage. The concept of mission command, allowing small units to act independently with minimal orders, owed much to commando experience. Their dawn raids became metaphors for leadership, knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to risk everything in a single decisive moment. Psychologists studying captured German officers noted an enduring theme in interrogation reports: the terror of uncertainty. One officer admitted that his men feared the light more than the dark. They expected death with the sunrise. That lingering psychological wound, planted by years of raids, testified to the intangible power of morale and myth. The British had turned unpredictability into a weapon as the Cold War began. Their legacy reshaped warfare's future. NATO planners adopted commando tactics for limited conflicts, while newly independent nations built their own special forces in the same image. The principle endured: small, mobile units operating in the liminal hour between night and day, where surprise and will could outmatch numbers. From the Falklands to Iraq, echoes of that philosophy continued, soldiers stepping onto hostile shores at first light, guided by the same creed born in the frozen fjords of Norway, standing on the cliffs above Sword Beach years later. An aging veteran of No. 4 Commando was asked what he remembered most. He said, "Dramatized the light. Always the light. We waited for it, feared it, and trusted it. Dawn was when everything could go wrong, or everything could be won." That single reflection captures their truth. The British Commandos were not merely fighters. They were craftsmen of time itself. They learned that victory wasn't only about force or fire, but about seizing the fleeting moment when the world shifted from shadow to flame. Their raids at dawn reshaped strategy, inspired generations, and reminded the world that even in its darkest hours, Britain still knew how to fight, and how to strike first. In the cold logic of war, the Commandos' legacy is measured in destroyed installations, captured codes, and delayed German divisions. But in the human story of courage, their legacy glows brighter. Men who turned fear into motion and dawn into a weapon. From the fjords of Norway to the beaches of France, they proved a simple truth written in salt and blood. When all else fails, strike at first light. And never look back.